Hey, boomers. Oh, I have a real treat for you today. We have with us Shoshanna French, who is a coach. She's an old friend, and uh, and we just connected again, last year when I was moving. And she came over. So I just want to welcome my friend Shoshana French joining us today.
Hi there. Hi, Michelle. I'm so excited to have a conversation about this. I think it's important.
Well, I have been seeing some of your posts about Simple Spirit and have not really had a good conversation with you about that. Um, so could you just talk with us a little about how you started that business and where it came from and what you do?
Mm. It's a wild story, but it starts with a boomer, a mutual friend that we have, actually. Her name is Lori Wostall. She's a coach. And
Mhm.
in 2005, so the work that I do, I've been training and developing like myself inside of this work as a coach and intuitive since I was 18. So for a long time. But in 2005, I found myself coming back from a terrible trip, pretty lost about what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And I found myself in a group called the Money Mastery with Lori Ostol, who is a remarkable human who's also a boomer and someone I really deeply respect. And I was in her coaching group, and she said, everyone in this group before the end of this year, because it was a year-long thing, is going to start a business. And I was like, what? I didn't think this was about that. And then we had conversations, with the people in this group who were all really smart women who did a bunch of different things, but all had jobs. And she said, let's talk about what you could do if you started a business. And for me, I was like, I don't know what I could do. And she was like, well, you have a bunch of different things you're interested in. So she really had me explore all of these ideas. I'm a singer and a songwriter. So we talked about that. And I'm a writer. We talked about that. And then she said, what about that thing you do with cards? And I said, do you mean tarot cards? She was like, yeah, you could do a business like that. And that's kind of how it started. It started from being supported by someone who could see that something more was possible inside of a conversation about, like what would it be like to not be broke and to create, more being possible. And so that's kind of how the business started. That was in 2005. And now it was 18 years in January of this year that I have had this business, and it's morphed and changed a lot. So that's how I ended up starting it.
Well, and you have like an exceptional roster of clients,
I do.
of
I've met some really remarkable
actors
people,
and
I have to say.
athletes and
Yeah.
business
And
people.
some founders of pretty successful businesses, $1 million and $1 billion founders, which is kind of cool. What I originally did was, I mean, really, I was a psychic and I did that for about 4 or 5 years. And again, another boomer literally guided me to in a class I took from him. He said, you're on the pathway in this business to become a famous psychic. Is that what you want to do? And I was like, oh, no, no, definitely not. I definitely don't want to do that. And he said, well, you're going to have to, make a pretty hard right and create something different then. So I kind of just started to listen and pay attention to what clients were saying at that time. I just met people at, my home office and did readings with them. And a lot of them were saying, I wish I knew how to do what you do. Not like be a psychic, but use my intuition to guide me, right? I wish I had your intuition that all the time, had access to it all the time. And what I realized is it was time to switch the focus to being more coaching, teaching, training. And so I started offering classes and one-on-one kind of intuitive training. And it kind of just morphed, right? It became how business goes. It changed. Different clients would come and ask me to do different things, and I'd say yes, even if I've never done it, even if I'd never done it before, because I was curious what it would be like to teach a different kind of person. And about I don't know, 7, 8, 9, 10 years into the business, all of a sudden I had clients across 12 countries because I would do a reading with someone or a session with someone and they would say, you've got to meet my friend. And then all of a sudden I had a client in Toronto and then that North America. Oh yeah, I totally do. And then Mexico and then Ireland and then all over Europe and India and Australia. And then it was like I was working with people all over the world. And that's kind of how it started. It's kind of how it started. And now what I would say is Simple Spirit is a training and coaching company that I train people how to practically apply intuition and teach people about intuitive decision making and what that is. It's more of a practical approach to something that people think that requires some certain dogmatic approach. Like you have to have some certain spiritual belief to use your intuition. Totally not true. It transcends age, transcends culture, transcends everything you could possibly imagine because intuition is something we all have. So that's what I do now. I train people how to use their intuition and they do it in business, but they also do it personally and otherwise.
With regards to intuition, then, it's something everyone has, but not everyone is able to access or implement, right? You teach
I
people
would say
how
that
to
it's,
do
I would
that.
say it's more, I do, but I mostly teach people to remember because if you are with children ever, right? They're really intuitive. They know when they're hungry, they know when they like someone, and they know when they don't like someone, like when they feel attracted to a place and when a place doesn't feel right to them. They tend to be really
Mhm.
like intrinsic is a word sometimes we use when people are being intuitive. They really trust that kind of intrinsic nature they have. But then we do stuff like, I don't care that you're not hungry. It's time to eat dinner. I know you don't like Mrs. Jones, but you have to be friendly to neighbors. Be a good little girl, be a good little boy, and be friendly, right? Uh, all the things that we train people to fit, it sort of has us learn to override our own intuition and then we stop using it.
Mm.
So what I find is that a lot of people is I'm writing a book right now and so I'm thinking a lot about this and the person I'm working with who's helping me write the book we're talking about this a lot, which is that to me intuition quite often and this practical application wise really comes into two categories. It's either what some people think of as like a warning, you know, like your intuition is warning you about something, or it is coming to you with like an idea. And what I find is that people only listen to those two extremes, but they don't use it for like this lesser known thing, which is like just to get guided on the easiest way to do things or having insight into people. They wait for like the muse to give them this crazy wild idea, like starting a new podcast, right? Or they wait for a warning, like, don't do that. Like, don't go on that trip. Don't trust that person. But it has to be really, really loud over our brain, over our training. So, what I find is not that people don't have access to it, it's that they forgot that they have access to it. And they forgot this thing that may happen all the time to them is actually intuition, but they've named it something else.
You know, what interests me about that is my dog Sadie always had a good intuition about people, and I was more present to her take on people than to my own.
Hmm.
Because she would growl. You know, I was like, oh, what's that? She never growls at people. Um, so it may be that it is just wired into mammals, maybe.
Yeah, I think
Uh,
it's definitely more complex in humans than it is. All of us have that instinct where we know safe, unsafe. And it's good that you mention a dog because dogs can really tell safe, unsafe. But but they don't have the
right.
processing power of the cerebral cortex. They don't have that like we do, right? And so,
Well, right. And they have no language. I mean, they can't talk
right.
things through with us.
Right. Exactly. They don't have that processing, right? That like under that like cognitive critical thinking that we have, which is both a plus and a minus in the column around intuition because everybody has access to instincts. Our reptilian brain is actually really good at letting us know when something's safe and unsafe, unless we have trauma, and then we can't trust it, right? Because then anything that triggers that trauma then makes us feel unsafe, whether or not the person in front of us or the place we are. We were just talking about my husband before we, got started today, and my husband has anxiety. And so that is what happens when someone has anxiety, is they can't trust that innate sense of what's safe and not safe. However, intuition is a little bit different than that. Intuition takes um, everything potentially that you could be observing, right? And gives you what is the most important pieces of information. So it helps you identify what you need to know, right? It helps you identify what a feeling means. And then with that, when you learn actually what this communication is, you can use it to help you navigate, whether you're navigating it for which Airbnb to choose on your vacation, which financial planner is the best one to use to manage your retirement or your 401k or something, or even when you're faced with the wall of, glucosamine and you don't know which one to buy, right? It's like intuition can be used for all of those things, not just how to avoid making a mistake or, fixing a problem. Those things are more about data. They're more about logic. And intuition is not that. So that's like, to me, I talk a lot with people about what intuition isn't and not as much about what it is. Because once people know what it isn't, then it's easier to see, oh, that got it. So when I meet someone for the very first time and I have this feeling like I know them already, and I even know things about them before they've told me, that's intuition. Yep, that's intuition.
Ah, and so is this something that you would say is kind of like practicing the piano or learning to sing? Or
Totally. Yes.
yes, so it's and some people are maybe more in tune with that or more talented.
Yeah.
And
Not
some
everybody
people sing,
has, right. Not everybody has a relative pitch, right? Or perfect pitch. Not everybody has that.
right,
But everybody can learn how to use this thing called their voice.
right. Well, I agree. Everyone can sing. That is my belief. Having sung since I was a little girl, I'm no opera star, but I sing in the church choir forever, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, you don't have to be a performer to be able to use your talents.
Yes, exactly. You can sing in the shower or in the car, and that's still singing.
Yes. Well, so this sounds like a skill that really, ought to be taught in the schools, ought to be made available to people.
Preach.
But it sounds as though who who usually gets the benefit are people who are functioning at a really high level in this society and go, okay, I know there's something else that will give me an edge. So if you're an athlete or a business person or a movie star, you are looking for what will give me an edge. Yes?
Yeah. Well, and it's also people like where it is actually taught is they talk about it in the military a lot. Like not if you're like a grunt, right, or a soldier. It's if you're someone who's in special operations of some kind, that
Mhm.
that like battlefield readiness where you have to like you have your orders, but in the moment you have to trust that instinct, that intuition that comes in and allow that to guide you, right? There's a book that your crew may be interested in listening to or reading, and it's called Blink. It's an older book by Malcolm Gladwell. He's the guy that wrote um, I think, oh my gosh, The Tipping Point, Talking to Strangers. Malcolm Gladwell is probably one of my favorite authors, but he wrote this book about called Blink, and it was about those split-second decisions that we make. He talks like a tiny bit about intuition, but I think he knew that if he used that word, especially how long ago this book came out, it probably came out about 15 years ago, that people weren't quite ready for that word in common conversation. However, um, the people who listen to their intuition are often those people who feel like they have enough power already to do it. But I have hundreds of stories of people who, thank goodness, trusted their intuition when other people who had authority told them not to. You know, one of the stories in my book is about this woman, Willow, who didn't feel well. She's probably like 40-ish. And she just didn't like, she didn't feel good. So she went to her doctor and said, I don't feel well. And he goes, great, let's run some tests. They ran all the tests. Fine. All of her numbers were good. She's a really healthy person, like super healthy. They're like, yeah, nothing, there's no numbers. And she's like, I don't know what to tell you, but I need you to go further and do like different kinds of tests because I'm telling you that I don't feel well. I know something's wrong. And he wouldn't listen to her. So she went to a second doctor and paid out of pocket for an MRI because she just knew something was wrong. And so they did a scan of her lady parts and she had cervical cancer. And they caught it because they caught it before it was showing up on tests because she knew something was wrong. And in the society we live in right now, and this especially goes like my mom is 68 and my mom was a nurse for 30 years and so she knows a lot about medicine and the medical world. However, even with someone like her, having to advocate for her own care is really hard because when you have someone you see as a expert like a doctor or a lawyer or a whomever the expert is and they're telling you this thing that doesn't feel right to you that you're wrong, that like you're being paranoid, you're being overly cautious, you're being overly sensitive, you're fine, whatever, we can override our own sense of what feels right to us. And so I 100% agree with you that we should, if we taught this to girls instead of finding all people threatening, like be aware of all men are threatening and wear pants and all the things we tell girls, right? Women, instead just say, trust your innate sense of what feels right, like trust that. And we train people to trust that. Then people would be able to trust that even someone who looks fine on paper in the body does not feel right. They learn to trust that. And in all those situations, just like my friend Willow with that doctor, just like the hundreds of people that I've trained in business, women in business, and where, other people said that it would never work and they didn't, they said, I don't care. And they did it anyway. And it did work because they knew it would. So, yeah.
Well, we stranger danger, doesn't do the job for training children to discern who is safe, who is not safe.
Right.
The best advice I ever heard, I think, was from the Good Neighbor who did the children's TV show. I can't think of his name. Mr. Rogers.
Mr. Rogers.
Mr. Rogers, who said, go find the people who are helping. If you are lost, if someone is bothering you, go to the people who are helping. And I thought that was the most useful thing in the lieu of training people in how to discern between good people and bad people, and trusting your feelings.
Yeah. Well, it's even more. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no. Well, I just, if you're traveling and you don't know anybody, there are times where you have to rely on strangers. And you can't just go, stranger danger. No, you need help. But you have to trust your gut about it.
You sure do. What I was going to say is that sometimes people who are not strangers aren't actually great. And if we're taught stranger danger, which, I was born in 76, so that was during the time where they taught that. My mom definitely taught me that. But in kindergarten, I knew my teacher didn't like me. I could just tell. And I went home and I said to my mom, my teacher does not like me. I said, I want to be put in another class. And my mom did what most moms would say, you're being really sensitive. I'm sure Mrs., whatever her name was, Mrs. Small likes you just fine. I think you're being, you talk a lot, honey. And so I bet you probably interrupt like all the things my mom tried to say to convince me that I was wrong, which makes sense from the hindsight of a mom trying to help her kid participate in society. However, I knew she didn't like me. So my mom goes to the PTA meeting, right, with my kindergarten teacher. And this woman says, hey, by the way, I just want you to know that we're going to get Shoshanna extra help because clearly she has a learning disability. And when I went to kindergarten, I was reading. I was reading like fourth grade level books. My mom goes, learning disability? What do you mean? And she goes, well, clearly she can't write. So my mom's like, well, bring her here. And so, I sit down, my right hand, I start writing. I'm left-handed. My mom taught me to write with my left hand. And mom goes, she's not right-handed, and put the pen in my left hand. And I start writing. And this woman was like, my mom was like, we got home. My mom said, I'm sorry, Shoshana. Obviously, you were right. She doesn't like you. We'll find you another teacher. And teachers are supposed to be the ones that help, right? Teachers are the ones who are supposed to be above all of that. But when we train kids to distrust that innate sense, and, I get it. Like, I've talked to so many different kinds of people that it sounds a little esoteric when you talk about intuition. And it seems less esoteric when you talk about it like, oh, it's an instinct we all have, like animals, because we're an animal. But when I say things like, well, yes, and it's actually bigger than that. It's much bigger than that. It is our ability to think outside of what we already know. Then when you get into that conversation, it it's like, oh, well, what do you mean? Well, like people who've invented stuff, where do you think that invention came from? That was their intuition, their ability to see beyond what they already knew and what was already possible. When we have a sense that someone is safe or this is the right thing, even though all outside sources, right, are saying don't do that, but for whatever reason it feels right to us, that's intuition. When in the book Blink, he talks about this guy seeing a statue that they did all the tests on. They're like, no, this is legitimate. But this guy just kept saying something about this doesn't look right. Found out it was a fake, a very, very well done forgery, but a forgery nonetheless, because he could see it, right? If you've ever talked to someone and they're
Mhm.
talking to you and you're like, something they're saying, like there's more to this than they're saying. I can hear it. It's because that's your intuition talking to you. So, I mean, I've talked, obviously, I can like roll on with this forever, but my basic point is that everyone has it. And really, it's just a matter of understanding how yours works and then practicing trusting it. It really just takes trust, like that practice of trusting it. And it gets harder sometimes when you're in situations where, for whatever reason, people want you to distrust yourself and to trust them instead. All the things we live in an ageist society, let's be honest, right? And so when people get older, sometimes people try to talk you out of the things you know to be true because you're older. This happens. I see this all the time and it's horrible. But to me, there's like, how can we treat people with respect and dignity as adults, even children as their own sovereign being, right? They have their own agency to trust when they want to hug someone and when they don't. Like being able to have that happen would be, to me, the right way to go about things. But that's just my perspective.
Well, I understand. I guess for me, I have always considered those insights to be answered prayer. That that's that's the training and path that I've come up on. Was ask God for what you need and it'll be there, so that it's not a surprise to get insights or new ideas or whatever, because, oh, well, you know, God gave them to me. So I so I don't know. That seems to me to be how I explain being in touch with things I wouldn't ordinarily think I would know, or so on. So I said we would talk a little about spiritual journeys. I guess that's part of my spiritual journey. Is there anything that you'd like to share about that?
About the spiritual journey. Well, I do want to say that I love what you just said about that. For you, it feels like answered prayer. Um, what I often tell people is that there's no required belief. There's just what's true for you. Um, and I would say that because I was raised by a biker and a hippie, that rules are not my thing. Right? They're just not my thing. And so, like a rebel and then, peace loving, don't tell us how to be, like those two combination of things made me. So we're not surprised by any of this. But I just intrinsic in my philosophy of life is that everybody finds their own path to truth, but your own truth is is like the most important part. So I I hope that people know that you can map on the conversation for intuition as far as where does it come from to the thing that matches your belief, whatever your belief is. I mean, I've worked with people whose spiritual beliefs are Christian and Hindu and Sufi and Muslim and atheist even. And it really agnostic, like all the varieties of different religious paths, and it fits for everybody because it's not a requirement, it's what your truth is. So I love that. That's not the first time I've heard someone say that. I love when people say intuition or insight is answered prayer. So my spiritual path, I was raised evangelical Christian specifically, no one certain denomination because we attended a couple of different churches, but they were very evangelical, very focused on being good little Christian soldiers and converting people. And I was converting people at 7. So I would be in, the grocery store and sharing my testimony, as we called it in my church. And I now in hindsight, I would call that being a Bible thumper. And I was that pretty hardcore until my senior year in high school. And my senior year in high school, there was a shooting at the Chuck E. Cheese I worked at. This was in 93, December of 93. So a lot of people who live in Colorado might remember the Chuck E. Cheese shooting in Aurora. That was like the first kind of mass shooting that happened. It happened before Columbine. And it was a block from the high school I went to. And um, all the kids who died were under 20, except for one person who was older who had moved away from LA to be away from the violence. And the person who shot everybody was the brother of one of my best friends. And so this thing happened, like if you can hear in your head right now, that snap when you break a pencil, it's like that sound was what happened. There was this break with what I believed to be true. Because part of being raised so evangelical was somewhat, if I'm honest about it, it feels a little cultish because it was very like there is one way only. This is the only way. And everybody who doesn't believe that needs to be saved. And so it made my view of the world very myopic. Like, this is the world. This is how it is. God protects his people, whatever. It was very naive, right? I was 16. What are you going to do? But all the people who died, all these teenagers who died were devout Christians, devout. Like one was a Catholic girl who had, participated in her church. Another one was a Mormon who was getting ready to graduate high school and then go on her mission. Another was a young kid who attended church across the block from my church. So I was like, what? And so then I was just very disillusioned, as you can imagine. And work that we share,
Mhm.
that was my moment of like, I'm on my own. It's like the break with everything. So I went off to college really in a space of seeking and curiosity. And you know how that goes. It can either attract you to that which is so helpful or not that. And I got a lot of not that first. Um, but eventually I found myself in this metaphysical bookstore. I was 18. My roommate took me there. She said, You have to go to this bookstore. And because I was raised so devout and very, very evangelical, metaphysical bookstores are like, that's where Satan lives, and I shouldn't go there. But this break that happened, I was a little more curious than I would have been otherwise. So I ended up this metaphysical bookstore. I walk in, this woman, Rosemary, says to me, "There you are." And I thought my roommate had told her about me, but she had had a dream. And in her belief, source is what she called it. Source in a dream said, there's going to be a woman who comes into your store, teach her everything you know. So over my 6 years, my 5.5 years of college, they let me join their metaphysical group meditation. I mean, I was 18. I'm just trying to imagine, hanging out with an 18-year-old in this. These were all metaphysicians. These people were twice my age, my mother's age, some were my grandmother's age. They taught me everything, taught me a whole bunch of stuff. They taught me about intuition. They taught me cards. They taught me about the world from a more global perspective, spirituality from a more global perspective, and it fit. And it made sense to me. They talked about instead of about the dogma of Christianity, they talked about Christ consciousness, right? We read the Course in Miracles, that kind of thing. So it just opened me up. And then, I found transformation, and that became my church for a while. And I converted a lot of people to that in the world of personal development. And then I was at an event, and this woman came up to me and she said, "What's your spiritual path?" And I was like, what an odd question, because I hadn't thought about my spirituality as a path in a really long time. And I told her a little bit about my background, kind of what I've already shared with you. And she said, "I'm teaching a class, and the goddess told me that you should come take it." And I was like, hmm. So I end up taking her class. It was a Wicca 101 class, pagan. And I went and took the class, and then I loved the nature as God, the goddess, like the feminine expression of the divine so much that I was initiated. And that was in 2008. I was initiated as a priestess and have been one ever since. And last year I took a high priestess program. So now I'm a high priestess. I'm not Wiccan because in my search for social justice, Wicca is based on something where it was a bunch of indigenous practices kind of not given credit and then created into a religion. And so now I follow the practices of my ancestors. So now I would say I'm more of like a Celtic priestess, Celtic high priestess. So I follow those traditions which come from my family. So that is my spirituality. So in short, it's nature is cyclical, and so are human beings. And the more connected we are to the cycles of nature, the more compassionate, kind, and loving we can be to other people. And we have power to create change in our life, either through our speaking, but also through intention, what some people call manifestation, I call magic. And that's it. That's what my spiritual path is and spirituality.
Uh-huh. Well, and I would call answered prayers.
Exactly. Yep. There's a word. Some people call it energy. Some people call it a vibe. Some people call it the Holy Spirit. It's all this, like, right? It's whatever word resonates with us.
Well, all pointing to something beyond really our day to day, beyond the day to day, beyond what we learned in school. It's and there's a lot. I mean, I guess I think of it as very faceted. It's like there is a truth there, and it's faceted, and some people see it through different facets. So they see it through manifestation, or they see it through. But things come to be that are beyond our explanations.
Yeah. I'm a practical
And I wonder,
spiritualist. So
you're
so
a
I
practical
have a lot of
spiritualist.
fun. I have a lot of fun researching the science behind spirituality, and now science is catching up. And so there's a lot of explanation where there wasn't before. I find that totally fascinating.
I hear a lot about energy these days, and now that they have looked at atoms and molecules smaller, 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 and have discovered there's not really matter anymore. It's all energy. It's like, really? Well, now what? So I find that to be a very interesting conversation. I went to seminary in California, School of Theology at Claremont. And while I was there, I just sort of bumped into a woman whose name was Z Budapest. And she said to me, "You're a priestess." I said, "No, I'm going to seminary." But it was something that I never forgot, is like, because rarely do people speak to you that way. So even though my path didn't go in that direction, I have a great deal of interest in it. So I really appreciate your willingness to share about that with us.
Yeah, it's core to who I am. There was like people talk about the like conversion moments, and they more talk about it in the world of people I know who become Christian, right? But that moment of conversion is just about the shift in spiritual awakening. And that was the experience I had when I learned about the wheel of the year and how magic lives in everything. And it was like, oh, and that it made sense to me, and it's continued to make sense to me. I learned about that in 2006, and we're 3 years shy of that being 20 years ago to me, which is crazy. And it's the pathway I've been on ever since. And you know, these practices are old, they're ancient. There's the Eleusinian mysteries and the things that people talk about and read in books, but don't realize that these things that are in books actually existed. When people read Myths of Avalon, what they don't know is that the rituals in Myths of Avalon are real, that druids and pagans practice those. And so, you know, I would say that one of my biggest pathways of spirituality is like, there's my own spirituality, like my own personal relationship with my path into the unknown as we're talking about it, right? Like how I organize the unknown in my own awareness. Um, and that matters to me, and that's a matter of faith. And I'm a big believer in honoring like the multitude of faiths that exist. Um, I
Yes.
think it's really important. And I also am a big believer in, and I'm not going to remember the exact quote, but it's, you know, if your belief is rooted in my oppression, then, then like that's not okay. And so that's often for me where, um, completely outside of what I do every day for work, there's like who I am in the world and how I operate and like what matters to me and my philosophy of life. And um, I'm working on the tattoo that I'll get because I have some, but I want the words on my body, which is harm none, but take no shit. And that for me is like my sorry for the cursing. You'll have to have like a warning now. Sorry about that. The that that to me that is my core philosophy of life, which is like, let's have freedom for all. But if you having your freedom is rooted in the oppression of someone else, that's like a problem for me. And the religion of my youth was rooted in the oppression of others. And that is an issue for me. And so I've spent many years reconciling how to have freedom, real freedom, like freedom of self and freedom for others without the oppression of people. And I definitely don't have the answer. I imagine if I did that I would be writing a book about it and trying to spread it all over the planet. But for now,
That is still yet to come, Shoshana.
yet to come. But for now, what I think about is one of my favorite writers, Brene Brown says, which is like, what the world needs now is bridge builders, people who are willing to have hard
Mhm.
conversations and stick in the middle between extremes and see how to connect. And so I think that all the years of, being a psychic first and, then learning about metaphysics and like my pathway, and then learning this really concrete connection to what is seen, which is the cyclical nature of like nature itself, but also still the unseen, the unexplainable. But why? But why? Even science can't explain all of it. I feel like my life and my spiritual pathway has been an expression of bridge building and like recognizing the values that I grew up with that have intrinsic good in them, even though there were
Yes.
practices of the church that were not great. And so I feel like I've done my own internal bridge building for a really long time and, you know, do my best to have those conversations with people.
Shoshana, I just want to thank you and acknowledge you for your willingness to be so generous, just so generous with what you experience yourself and in teaching other people how to be attuned to that which is already inside them and to being a bridge builder. That is just wonderful. It's just wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate the conversation and thanks for having me on. And you are that too. You're a bridge builder too. So we find each other and support one another.
Thanks. Okay, everybody, that's it for today. We just thank Shoshanna French so much for joining us for this conversation. Welcome back, boomers. This is Michelle Parrish Zuniga with This Boomer Life. And our guest this morning was Shoshanna French, a consultant to movie stars, business people, millionaires, and athletes. And she teaches them how to use their intuition to achieve the results that they're looking for. It was wonderful to hear about her spiritual journey as well as what it is exactly that is intuition. The takeaway for me is that intuition is a part of every person. If you are human, you have access to intuition. You may not fully be able to express it fully, but it is there when you need it. Also, Shoshana is working on a new book, and when that comes up for publication, we'll put it on the show notes to update you. Also, you can communicate directly with Shoshana if you're interested in having a consultation with her. And she also has a blog, so easy to follow up. That's it for today, boomers. See you next week.